Building government. Political campaigning now giving way to watching and waiting as a new government takes shape. Observations from experienced political strategists on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
Iowa Communications Network. The availability of high-speed broadband service is essential to fulfilling the promise of a connected Iowa. ICN's Broadband Matters campaign showcases the importance of delivering broadband to all corners of Iowa. Information is available at broadbandmatters.com. Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. The Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
The Arlene McKeever Endowment Fund at the Iowa Public Television Foundation, a fund established to support local programming on Iowa Public Television.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, November 25 edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
Republicans won big in the past election, but for many Republicans, the celebrating is somewhat tempered. And that's because President-elect Donald Trump's pedigree doesn't have the political blue blood, providing predictability. In fact, he cites unpredictability as an asset. Well, for insight, we're convening a couple of Republican insiders. Des Moines attorney Doug Gross, a former gubernatorial chief of staff, once ran for governor himself. And Steve Scheffler, representing Iowa on the Republican National Committee and president of the Iowa Faith and Freedom Coalition. Gentlemen, both of you have been here before. Welcome back to Iowa
Good to be
Press.
with you, Dean.
Good Doug.
That's quite a term of derision, by the way, calling us insiders, you know. Particularly in the Republican
It's
Party.
a compliment.
Okay.
It gives you credibility.
Okay.
But Doug, we're taping this the day before Thanksgiving, and does that really mean that this is a really celebrating holiday for Republicans?
It really is, because if you look at it, particularly if you look at it in Iowa, we haven't had a day like Election Day in Iowa for Republicans in a long, long time. And when is the last time in Iowa Des Moines County went Republican? Lee County went Republican for the president. Wapello County went Republican for the president. It was overwhelming. There was clearly in Iowa now a wave for Republicans.
We'll get to that in just a moment, but I want to introduce the people across the table. Des Moines Register columnist Kathie Obradovich and Radio Iowa's news director Kay Henderson.
Steve Scheffler, there's a group of people who refer to themselves as Never Trump. Are they welcome back in the party?
Absolutely. I was sad that they couldn't get on board initially, I guess, because they had a perfection standard that they were expecting Donald Trump to cross, and according to them, that didn't happen. But naturally, you know, we want them back in the party because there's a lot at stake to save freedom and liberty in this country, so certainly we want them back in the fold, you bet.
Was it helpful or harmful to have all that energy in the party, be it positive or negative? Do you think it actually helped Trump to have that happening in the GOP?
I mean, I think, you know, the people that saw what was at stake were on board, and so I think a lot of this noise of the no-Trumpers was just kind of a distant roar, basically talking themselves in an echo chamber. So it was a distraction maybe if you watch social media. But in the scheme of big things, there were a lot of people that wanted to see a change in the direction of our country and everything in our state. So they got on board, and we saw a great victory.
But didn't it play into his argument that I'm an outsider?
Yeah, I think so. You know, because but I think that you had a perfect candidate for a perfect storm because a lot of people were fed up with the status quo. And you know, my visit with Phyllis Scheffler, you might know she endorsed Donald Trump early on. I asked her why she had done this, and she said, you know, over the years, you know, our constituency has been lied to, promises have been made, they've been broken. And I'm looking for somebody that can shake the system up and save our country before it's too late. And I think a lot of people are in that same mold, that they were kind of sick of the same old Republican establishment that had promised a lot of things and then didn't deliver.
And Ms. Scheffler probably didn't get a chance to vote before she passed away.
Yeah, so it's kind of sad because she actually wrote a book called The Conservative Case for Donald Trump that was actually published, but it hadn't been in hadn't been in publication yet throughout the country, that she had written right before she died, along with her new executive director.
What about your comment on echo chamber? I didn't quite catch. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess what I mean is a lot of the no-Trumpers were basically talking a lot on social media, beating up on Donald Trump. And even though it might have seemed like it was a majority, it was a distinct minority, but it was just basically people that are negative by nature that, unless it's their own perfect candidate, Donald Trump didn't pass the smell test, for them,
Doug Gross, did Donald Trump pass your smell test before November 8th? Was he your perfect candidate for a perfect storm?
No. I think I indicated on this show previously that I was never comfortable with Donald Trump for lots of reasons.
In fact, you said at one time Ted Cruz is waiting along the side of the road for Donald Trump to have an accident and drive off the road.
Something like that.
Yes.
Well, there were a lot of predictions that Donald Trump would be the end of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Does his victory change that, or has Donald Trump changed the Republican Party?
I think Donald Trump changed the Republican Party in lots of ways. And if you look at this nationwide, there's sort of a realignment going on that I think was reflected in this election, where the Rust Belt states to the north, which traditionally were Democrat, particularly the working class folks, became very strong Republicans because Donald Trump spoke to them in a very real way. Hillary Clinton called them deplorable. I thought that was sort of the defining moment of the election when she made that comment about deplorables. That was like the 47% speech that Romney made. It really turned all those people and reaffirmed they could not vote for her. Yet in the South, think about this, Iowa, the distance between Trump and Clinton was greater in Iowa than it was in Texas. So in some respects, we're more of a red state than Texas as a result of what Trump did by speaking to working class voters. Now, people can say, well, they were voting because they're racist, they're misogynists, or whatever kind of thing they want to say. But fundamentally, these are people that hadn't had a raise in 16 years.
Was that an aberration in this election as far as the Iowa division?
I think it's been occurring over time. I think it's also been occurring over time in the upper Midwest. I think there is some realignment going on here, where the Democrats are going to become more and more a party of sort of the elites and the coasts and the urban areas, and the Republicans are going to be more focused on the disaffected rural areas and the central part of our country. It's really been a realignment.
The Democrats, Steve, are having soul searching right now about their focus on identity politics, and did they go too hard on essentially marketing themselves to minorities, et cetera. But is there any soul searching to be done in the Republican Party about how long you can keep winning without appealing more directly to women and minorities in the country?
I don't know what the final figures were, but I think actually nationally, Donald Trump won white women, and I think overall he only lost the women's vote by maybe 8 percentage points. I don't know what the exact figures were. And yeah, I think the Republican Party needs to do a better job, but I think a lot of that has been the Democrats turned off a lot of voters because it was an identity politics where they basically only talked about certain classes. And I think that is going to become more and more of a non-winning message.
They turned off a lot of white voters, but the demographic change in the country suggests that may not be a winning strategy forever.
No, and I understand we have to be better messengers. The Republican Party is the party of people of all races and all colors and all economic standards and everything. But I think that the Democrats have painted themselves into a very far left position. I mean, when I was growing up, there were a lot of Democrats in the U.S. Senate that were conservatives, but they basically had become the element of the fringe, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Bernie Sanders, that only appeals to a very small fringe. So I think they're the party that has some concerns even more than we do, even though we have to work at it.
Could another candidate,
Go ahead,
Doug, win with Donald Trump's playbook? Could anybody else win?
Well, Iowa, in Iowa, a lot of candidates won. Overwhelmingly. I mean, in many respects, they finished ahead of Trump. Look at those Senate races where in Democrat areas, they won with over 60% of the vote. So clear. I call this the Jerry Messer election. I don't know if you know who Jerry Messer is, but he's an old union leader in Davenport, head of the UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers. And he's a friend of mine. You know Jerry?
Yeah.
Great guy. I love him. But Jerry told me a long time ago, he said, Doug, my people are not going to vote for Hillary. They will not vote for Hillary. They're either going to vote for Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, depending upon who's elected, because she doesn't speak to them. And this was sort of the capstone of what I would call the Jerry Messer election. Now, lest we Republicans start dancing and do the Toyota kick in the end zone here, we ought to be careful, because for the reason you talk about, there are demographic trends here that are strong. While we did well in the upper Midwest, we're older, we're whiter, and we're not going to be around that much longer in a lot of cases. While in the ascendant South and Mid-South, where there are more immigrants, more people of minority, other folks, those potentially can appeal to Democrats if we aren't careful. So one of the things that Trump has to do as president is reach out to those folks and make certain that they understand through his actions they aren't necessarily reflective of some of the words that he used.
Steve, as a member of the Republican National Committee, you worked with Reince Priebus, the chairman, in a way most people didn't. What do you think his role as chief of staff for President Trump means for your party and for the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, I was thrilled when he named him as chief of staff. And secondly, he's got those ties with the Republican, if you want to call them the establishment, the congressmen, the senators, that's going to bode well for Donald Trump to make sure that he can get his program through Congress. So I think it was a superb appointment and building those bridges. So, and of course, if it wasn't for Reince and the huge program that he put in place, Donald Trump wouldn't be President-elect Donald Trump, so.
You're talking about sort of a new way of campaigning in which the Trump campaign did not manage voter turnout efforts. Right. The Republican National Committee did.
And of course, he's worked on this for the last 6 years that he's been the GOP chairman, but he's done a superb job of building that infrastructure because of the amount of money he was able to raise, the targeting voters and what their key issues were and making sure they were identified and then turned out. And where they actually had people, that were, I don't know what it was called, but a pod or something, where they had people that were of like mind in those communities, like in the Hispanic community, that worked in those areas to get them out, target them and get them out to vote. So it was a very intense program that for once, matched the Democrats tit for tat in terms of turnout and grassroots efforts,
Eric Branstad was the state director for the Trump campaign.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is next for him?
I don't know. I guess you'll have to ask him, but he did a superb job, and I know my working relationship with his was great. They worked with everybody, in getting coalitions on board and getting all the elements that you need to win a purple state like Iowa. So I think he did a superb job.
What do you think, Doug?
For Eric?
For Eric.
Yeah, Eric worked on my campaign, and in 2002, and I think it was
when you ran against Tom Vilsack.
Tom Vilsack, and one of the first campaigns, if not the first campaign he worked on it. And just to see his growth and development as a political operator was really wonderful to see. I think Eric can probably, if he wanted to go to D.C., would have the opportunity to do so. If he wanted to, and play a significant role in some agency, because Eric did a wonderful job.
What about Tana Gertz, the apprentice who worked on the campaign here and was the visible face of the Trump campaign at a lot of the rallies before Mr. Trump arrived on stage?
Well, I think she was a good asset. She wasn't I don't think her expertise was in the area of, the grassroots stuff, but certainly she was a good communicator and did a lot of good in terms of getting people motivated, to turning out for Trump, and so she played a valuable role in the campaign. There's just no doubt about it.
Chief meteorologist, I think she'll be for the Trump campaign.
We talked about Reince Priebus for a minute there, but what do you think about the choice of Steve Bannon as sort of his bookend as a senior advisor, and the tone that sends from the Trump campaign?
First thing, I think a lot of stuff with Steve Bannon has been overplayed. And the bottom line is, I think that the mixture of him and Reince Priebus is a good melting point because Bannon will keep him focused on conservative issues, on issues that his base was expecting him to deliver on. So I think that's a very good combination there to make sure he stays focused.
Well, follow that up. Are you also intimating that Priebus will rub the rough edges off?
I suppose you could
Bannon?
say that, anybody that knows Reince Priebus knows that even though he's a political operative and he's he's deemed maybe the establishment. He himself is a solid, rock-solid conservative, so I'm not too concerned about
I see that a lot like what Reagan did with Jim Baker and Ed Meese when he took over in 1980, where he needed one person who was part of his own team, hardcore, and he needed another person who knew how to operate in Washington. And and they fought all the time. But at the end of the day, it made Reagan a better president. And I think that was a smart move on Trump's part. With regard to Bannon I see as a nationalist, which is interesting because nationalists, by definition, don't mind big government. So I don't necessarily see him as a conservative. I mean, he's a big guy on infrastructure spending and building. You can't become a nationalist and believe in mercantile sort of trade policies without building up the power and influence of a national
But he's
government.
a lightning rod.
Yeah, he is on other issues. But on that issue is one that I find really interesting because I don't know how the Republican Party is going to handle that, because we could have real serious deficit issues. We could have real serious spending questions that Republicans traditionally are concerned about that this administration probably won't even take a look at.
What do you make of the sort of emboldened and upfront demonstrations of celebration from white supremacist groups? Is Donald Trump doing enough to say, shut up and go away, or should he even be saying that?
Well, he definitely, I mean, he has a couple of different times now on national TV say, no, I'm not part of that, please be quiet, all of that. I think he could do more. I mean, we don't want a situation for the country, for the Republican Party, for anyone, where this is perceived as the ascendance of white nationalism. I'm concerned just about nationalism from a standpoint of the state of Iowa and what that means for trade for us long term. But white nationalism is anathema and should be stated as such.
Do you agree, Steve?
Absolutely, you bet.
And do you have any suggestions of what more Donald Trump could say or do to make it very, very clear?
Well, there was this
that
video
is
clip of
not
this
his...
guy. I can't even tell you where it was. It was just the other day where I think Donald Trump kind of called him on the carpet. So, you know, just because people maybe are tooting they support a certain person doesn't mean they agree with that agenda at all. But, yeah, I think he's done some things and more needs to be said. But, you know, I think he's on the right track. So.
Speaking of things that Trump has said on television, he did an interview with 60 Minutes in which he talked about the Supreme Court, and he said he wanted to appoint justices that would overturn Roe v. Wade. And then he said that Obergefell, which is the decision which legalized same-sex marriage, is a settled issue. Did that disappoint conservatives?
I don't want to speak for them. I think they're looking at the big picture. I think for a lot of voters and a lot of people I talk to, the Supreme Court was the big issue, because knowing that Hillary Clinton would appoint people probably in their 40s and 50s who would be there for 40 or 50 years, and I think as Governor Branstad said and Senator Grassley said, this is not about an election just for the next 4 years, it's about for the next 40 or 50 years who sits on the Supreme Court. So when you look at the overall picture of the decision that will come down the pike, having people on the court that will interpret the Constitution and not try to rewrite law, I think is very important. So that's the big picture that I think people are focused on. That's important.
But at your fall event, you are also the leader of the Iowa Faith and Freedom Coalition. You encourage people to vote no on the Iowa Supreme Court justices who had been involved in the decision which legalized gay marriage here in 2009. This is something that Republicans, conservatives, feel strongly about. Do you think their president will champion that position?
I think so. And let's face the facts. You know, what the Supreme Court did probably is never going to be undone. And the bottom line is, I think one of the big issues now that a lot of these voters are going to be zeroed in on is the preservation of religious liberty. And certainly with the election of Donald Trump, I think we're going to get that. With the election of Hillary Clinton, I think that would have been very, very iffy, to the point where churches would have been very well bound up in knots. You know, Trump, to his credit, was the one that was talking about undoing the Johnson Amendment. So I think the big issue for a lot of these voters now, and rightfully so, is the preservation of religious liberty. And with Donald Trump, we get that, and with Hillary Clinton, I think that would be down the tubes.
I thought it was interesting, though, that the strongest supporters of Trump never took him literally, really on anything. His opponents always took him literally. And I think one of the lessons of this campaign, and probably of his governance, is to watch what he does, not necessarily always what he says, but he's a performer. a very good performer and knows how to dominate a news cycle like nobody we've ever seen.
Well, that's interesting because my next question was about things he has said since there were things that Trump, the candidate, said, and now there are things that Trump, the president-elect, is saying. And people are looking at this and saying, well, what about some of these campaign promises? You know, there was building the wall. Well, maybe parts of it will be a fence. Throw Hillary Clinton in jail? Maybe not. You know, there were several other things. You know, does he want to pull out of the climate accord? Well, maybe not.
Are you asking Kathie credibility?
Yeah, well, I'm saying, you know, which Donald Trump should we believe? The Donald Trump
Watch what he
or,
does.
Yeah.
Watch what he does. Don't watch just what he says. And what he's doing now is appointing people to key positions. So that's the key thing that you should watch.
But is that going to be enough because he rallied certain segments of the voter population?
The people that support Trump don't take him literally, Dean. So as a result, they give him room on these things that other politicians never had. And it's difficult for the media and others who review this thing to try to analyze him because we think words have meaning, they have impact. And normally as a president they do. So it'll be interesting to see once he is president, can he get by with saying one thing and doing another?
Well,
he has so far.
Are there campaign promises that Donald Trump made that you think his base is going to take literally and want to hold him to that campaign promise? Or is everything negotiable?
Some of them, but I think what Donald Trump understands and what most people that are politically astute understand is that if you want to get your agenda passed through Congress, you have to basically methodically look at things that you can do in the first 100 days and get them through, as opposed to maybe getting into a middle of a landmine that might blow up in your face and is going to stymie you from getting that agenda. So there's a time and place for those things on his public policy agenda. And I just have to tell you that I'm very pleased where he's gone so far in knowing that he has to weigh these things out politically, where he's going to, you know, hit the target and then pursue other things later on.
Are there some things he promised that you would be very disappointed if he did not?
Well, I think
deliver?
one of the biggest promises he made that I think he's going to fulfill is basically, especially people that have committed crimes like illegals are going to be deported, the seediest of that element. And so I think those issues that are very important to the base, he is going to fulfill those promises. So I'm not
I don't think
too
he
concerned.
could get by appointing a moderate to the Supreme Court, for example.
No, exactly.
There are some issues like that. But you understand what Donald Trump, a lot of these things are, it seems to me he sort of bifurcates the campaign and the governance very clearly in his mind. And he saw the campaign as a process by which he had to do whatever it took to win. Now, once he's the president of the United States, he's going to do whatever he thinks he needs to do to be successful. I think there are two different things for him.
What does it mean for Iowa? That is, we're going to get to state politics here very quickly, but does the Trump election mean some special goodies for Iowa?
I'm actually concerned about things. For example, one thing he said he was going to do in the campaign and he said he was going to do in the first 100 days is get us out of TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's probably no trade agreement more important to the Iowa economy than Trans-Pacific Partnership because it allows us to access to 40% of the world's GDP that we don't have access to now. And it allows
he was pretty adamant. How can he backpedal on that?
And he's not. But my point is, unless he substitutes that with something else that gives Iowa access, 1 out of every 3 of those soybean rows you look at as you drive down the highway goes to China. And if we put in place a tariff against China, I'm telling you, we're not going to sell. They're going to buy their beans from Brazil and not from us.
Do you think unilateral?
And that concerns me.
Can unilateral trade deals replace the impact of the TPP?
Well, he's talking about bilateral trade deals, country to country instead of multilateral. And you can. It takes a lot of work. They're very slow. It's very difficult. I mean, I'm a beef producer. This gave us access to the Japanese market that we've been trying to get access to for 50 years. And all once that's gone. So yes, that concerns. That's why I'm saying nationalism, mercantilism is not particularly good for Iowa because if you're going to do a lot of infrastructure spending, mark my word, it's not going to be in Iowa. It's going to be in large cities. It's going to be in populated areas. If you're going to have trade policies that don't allow impact exports, it's going to hurt Iowa because we produce way more than we can consume.
Steve, you're a member of the RNC. Will Iowa's caucuses remain first? Will they remain caucuses? Mr. Trump has said that he likes primaries better.
But also, to his credit, at the urging of Jeff Kaufman, our great state chairman, he did make a statement from the podium at the rallies on 3 or 4 occasions that he wanted Iowa to stay first. And I believe he will keep his word. Of course, he's going to be the one naming the new RNC chairman. And I'm hopeful, and I actually just had a conversation with Reince today, hoping that Reince has some input with Donald Trump as to who that nominee will be. I don't expect the new chairman, to be naturally biased towards Iowa, but certainly give Iowa a level playing field so that he or she, whoever is named by Trump, is not weighing in against Iowa. And of course, we've got this 11-member commission that will be appointed by the new chairman in January to kind of weigh that whole thing out. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to be okay, but you never can say never, because as you know, 3 meetings prior to the convention meeting, Iowa was on the agenda to chop us away from that First in the Nation caucus.
Kathie, take us into State House politics.
Yeah, okay. So one of the other big victories for Republicans on November 8th was taking over the Iowa Senate. And my question is about agenda, Steve. Do you think that Republicans should be really aggressive and try to push through, big tax cuts, et cetera, big gestures, or do they need to be careful because the pendulum could swing back in 2018?
I think they need to be aggressive. And again, I'm sure they're going to figure out where they can get their biggest bang for their buck, in this legislative session. But I think they need to go for it because apparently the voters gave us a mandate, and so I think they should be very aggressive on some things that are important to Iowa voters and Iowa taxpayers.
Doug, you weren't in the governor's office at the time when Terry Branstad had 2 years of Republican leadership in the State House, but you were around.
Yeah.
What are the lessons?
I've been around a long time.
Well, yeah, haven't we all? What are the lessons that this crop of Republicans should learn from 2 decades ago?
Don't get ahead of your headlights. It's very important that you not, because Governor Branstad tried to push through an education reform agenda in '98 and had a terrible time with his own party in an attempt to do that. I think this is a little bit different in that, in this case, the Republicans who won the legislative seats really didn't have a specific agenda other than they didn't like, trolleys for lobbyists and heated sidewalks and stuff.
Today, yeah.
But they didn't really have a specific issue agenda. So I think the governor has a really hot hand in this legislative session because he did more to help them win control than really any other person did. And so I think, and they don't have an agenda, so the agenda he puts out will have enormous impact this year. So what the governor does will be really impactful. Now the problem is they don't have any money, and it's very difficult to cut taxes when you don't have any money. So that's going to be the tension during this session.
Steve, do you expect Terry Branstad to seek another term?
I guess I'll let him make that decision. I don't want to, in politics, it's never a given. So I respect the decision that he'll make. So I don't want to second guess what he will or he won't do.
He could be ambassador to China.
You expect that?
I think he should be offered something. And if I think he were offered that, he'd probably take it.
Thanks a lot for your insights. And I think you both just paved the way to have you back to follow up on what you've just predicted.
Happy to.
All right. Thanks.
Happy to have you back,
Thank you.
too, Dean.
Thank you. Well, we'll be back next week with another edition of Iowa Press, 7:30 Friday night and noon on Sunday. I'm Dean Borg, and for all of us around this table, thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation,
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
Iowa Communications Network. The availability of high-speed broadband service is essential to fulfilling the promise of a connected Iowa. ICN's Broadband Matters campaign showcases the importance of delivering broadband to all corners of Iowa. Information is available at broadbandmatters.com. Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. The Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
The Arlene McKeever Endowment Fund at the Iowa Public Television Foundation, a fund established to support local programming on Iowa Public Television.